Can't hear? I wasn't talking too clearly. How's that? Better? Is that better? Somebody let me know. Sounds good? Okay, thank you so much. I'll try to, if I have to adjust it, I'll try. One second. Welcome, Anthony. Good to have you here. So I'm so happy to, I'm trying to find the right balance so you can see my face, but you can hear me. I'm really happy to be offering this session today on a subject that I really love, the subject of Buddha's wise instruction. And I offered a version of this session a long time ago when I first started doing the lives on Insight Timer. I think it was maybe in last September or maybe October or something. And I've been wanting to do it again, and some people in my circle were asking for something about the Buddhist path, and so I wanted to offer this. And I just have such a deep love for the Buddha, and not only the Buddhist teachings, but the Buddha himself as a historical figure and a sage is so inspiring to me, and I feel very connected to him just personally. And I think that that's something beautiful and important when we can actually feel a connection to these great souls who are sharing their wisdom with us. To be able to feel a personal connection really helps. When we can relate to their journey, it helps our journey as well. So I'm going to share a little bit with you a very condensed version, a condensed story about the Buddha. And then I really want to share with you some of the teachings around the First Noble Truth. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the Four Noble Truths, which is really, the Four Noble Truths are the foundational teachings of the Buddhist tradition. And but the First Noble Truth, I think, is really powerful and worth exploring and going into. And then we'll sing and do some meditation, try to make a journey out of it. So happy to see you all. It just really warms my heart. Thank you for being here and spending part of your Sunday or Monday, depending on where you are, with me. So I'm just going to start with an invocation, and I like to do that, those of you who've come to my sessions before, and then we'll start the session. Well, we're starting it now, but you know what I mean. Thank you. Snigdha Bhagavati Nandasmida Srimaki Vatsayamritavarshinim Sumaturam Sankirtanalapini Shyamangim Madhusikta Sukti Amritanandatmika Ishvari Om Amriteshwari Namaha Om Amriteshwari Namaha Om Amriteshwari Namaha Ananta Samsara Samudvatara Nakaitavya Guru Bhakti Davyam Vairagya Samranjata Pujanapya Namo Namah Shri Guru Padukapyam Namo Namah Shri Guru Padukapyam Namo Namah Shri Guru Padukapyam Namo 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 So I just breathe in, hold for a moment, and exhale through your whole body. Just releasing everything, releasing the day, releasing the thoughts, the heaviness. We'll do it 2 more times. Just breathe in very naturally. Hold for a moment if it's comfortable. And then exhale through your whole body. Purifying our mind, our energy field, our physical body. 1 more time, just breathe in, hold, and exhale. Just release everything. Let your mind and body be together here in the same place. And gather yourself back. I like to say that heaven is a gathered mind and hell is a scattered mind. So let's all be in heaven together and gather our mind to be here in the present. Thank you. I tweaked my soundboard for another event, and so sorry about that. It didn't sound quite normal to me when I was singing. I just adjusted it. So the Buddha is just an amazing, amazing person. And it's incredible to me when studying the lives of different saints and sages, how their teachings and their wisdom and their stories, they just continue on for thousands of years. You know, the Buddha was alive about 2,500 years ago, and it's absolutely amazing that his teachings are still so present in the world, and that so many people are following his footsteps and the path that he set down. That just shows so much that the spiritual wisdom from different masters and prophets is timeless, and it touches to something that is really at the essence of our humanity, you know, through the ages, which by itself I just think is absolutely amazing. And I first started studying Buddhism really in depth when I was a teenager, when I was about 17. Shortly after that is when I met Thich Nhat Hanh, who was one of my first very beloved teachers, and have studied Buddhism for a very long time in many different lineages and traditions. You know, there's so many different kinds of Buddhism from in different parts of the world, and the different types of Buddhist practices and traditions are often influenced by the culture where it's blooming and stuff like that. So it's really fascinating to learn about all of that. But there are some foundational teachings, like what we're going to talk about today, that are across the board, really anywhere we look in the Buddhist tradition, no matter whether it's in Southeast Asia or China, Japan, or Tibet, or anywhere. These are the seeds that form that foundation. So I'm sure many of you know the basic story about the Buddha, but just for a short little storytelling, maybe some of you have heard my Life of Buddha. It's a sleep story, which is ironic since Buddha means awakened one, to awaken, but it's in the sleep section on the app. but but I had such a wonderful time recording that. It's a story called The Life of Buddha that was adapted from different traditional texts, and I shortened that because it was in the public domain, so I was able to do that, and then I recorded this story. And it just was so inspiring. I really felt like I entered the world of the Buddha. And when I studied comparative religion for a lot of my life, most of my schooling, my graduate school and undergraduate focused a lot on that. And I just never ceased to be just so in awe of just the Buddha himself. So 2,500 years ago, in an area called Lumbini, which is in southern Nepal, there was a king. His name was King Shuddhodana, and he was married to Queen Maya. This is going to be the very condensed version, so the turbo Buddha story. And the king ruled in this town, this big city called Kapilavastu. And one night, his wife, Queen Maya, she had a dream that this white elephant was entering her body through her right side. And there were all sorts of auspicious things that started happening. And eventually, she gave birth to the Buddha. And there's different stories tell the accounts in different ways, but it's sort of, there's a mysticalness to it and a magicalness to it that's really beautiful when you read some of the traditional texts. One that I really love is called the Buddha Charita by a poet saint whose name was Ashwagosha. I think it was written around the 8th century, but I could be wrong about that. But it's just so beautiful. So after the Buddha was born, there was a great sage whose name was Asita. And he came to see the boy. He came to visit the king and to see this baby. And when he saw the Buddha, he told the king, your son is going to be a chakravartin. That's the word, chakra, like wheel. It's actually not really, people often say chakra, it's actually chakra. Chakra is a wheel. Chakravartin, a wheel-turning king. Or he's going to be a monk. And he's going to renounce the world. So the king was completely freaked out because he wanted to pass on, his world to his son, and he definitely did not want him to renounce the world. So he was a little freaked out, and he decided that he was going to keep his son in their amazing palace complex and give him everything you could ever want. Everything at all he had. Beautiful girls, music, entertainment, all the food, all the, he was living the dream, whatever that means, but he was living it the way that a lot of people think the dream is. And he had it all, and he was an amazing man. He had so many aptitudes. He could do all kinds of different things and do them all so beautifully and so perfectly. And then one day, he sort of got a feeling that he wanted to go outside of the palace to see what was going on out there. And so he asked his father if he could leave the palace. His father was keeping him sheltered there because he didn't want him to see what was outside of that very protected space. But he wanted to go out. So his father finally agreed, and before he had him go out of the palace, he had the whole area just cleaned and beautiful. There was nothing disturbing that he could see on the streets, and he just made it, all the people were gathered and they were celebrating the Buddha. So the Buddha went out, and he went with his charioteer, whose name was Chandaka. And they were going out of the palace and going down the, pathways, and then he saw something that he had never seen before. He didn't know what it was. It was an old man, and he was hobbling with a little stick, and he was all hunched over. And the Buddha asked his charioteer, "What is that? Who is that? I've never seen anything like that before." And he said, "Oh, that's old age." And the Buddha said, "Old age? I don't even, never heard of that before. Is that something that's going to happen to me?" And he said, "Yes, yes, that is something that's going to happen to you." And the Buddha was just stunned and taken aback, and he didn't understand what was going on. He had never been exposed to this before. So they went back to the palace, and he started, ruminating and wondering what was going on. Again, he wanted to go out of the palace, so they went out again. This time they went out, and he saw someone who was sick. And he asked the charioteer again, "What is that? What's happening to this person? What's wrong with him?" And the charioteer said, Siddhartha, that was his name. Siddhartha, the word Siddhartha, means one who accomplishes his aim. And the Buddha was born into the Shakya clan. So when you sometimes hear Shakyamuni Buddha, Shakya is a reference to the clan Shakyas that he was born into. So he saw this sick person, and then he really started freaking out, thinking, "Oh my God, this is going to happen to me, and how are these people going about their lives acting like everything's fine when this is going to happen?" Went back to the palace. Then again, he went out another time. This time he saw a corpse that was being carried. And he thought, "Oh my God, what is that? I've never seen this. What is that?" And the charioteer said, "Oh, Prince, that's death." And he said, "Death? What do you mean? What do you mean? He's just lying there." And he said, explained what death is to him. And he said, "Death comes for everyone, even for you." Then Siddhartha really went downhill, because he really thought, "Oh my God, old age, sickness, and death, this is going to happen to me? How are people in the palace just eating everything and dancing and acting like life is fine and denying that this world is going to lead to death?" So he just was in this dark, dark place. And he begged his father, decided to go out one more time. This time when he went out of the palace, he saw a monk. And he asked the charioteer, "Who is that? What is that?" And he explained to him, "He's a monk. He has renounced this life. He has renounced this world. He's in search of freedom," explained to him. Then the Buddha went back to the palace. And at this point, the Buddha was married, and he had a son. This is the condensed version, remember? I'm just skipping a lot of chapter. So he went back after he saw, it's called the four sights, the four sightings. He went back to the palace, and his mind was just like in such a dark place, and he was looking around just thinking, "I don't understand how people are just acting like everything is normal when this is going to happen to us, to me, to you." So the short story is, he realized that he needed to leave the palace, and he needed to discover the truth, to figure out how to uh, understand the meaning of this old age, sickness, and death. And so he left in the middle of the night. He went out to the stables and his charioteer was there, and his horse named Kantaka, that was the name of his horse. And in some of the stories, like in the Buddha Charita, the horse like flew out of the palace. There's kind of this beautiful mystical story. And I think anything is possible. So he flew out, and they went deep into the forest, and eventually they left the prince there. And the horse and the charioteer were so sad to leave him there and to say goodbye, and they knew, of course, his wife and his father and everybody in the palace were going to be devastated, but he knew that he needed to do that because he couldn't make peace with what he saw outside the palace. So he got there into the woods. They left him, and he cut off his long hair, and he started wandering, and he had different experiences with different teachers that he met, different masters. And at one point he was spending time with these 5 other disciples, 5 other they weren't really monastics at that time, but they were in search of truth like him, and they were living in a very austere way. Some of the texts describe that the Buddha, he only ate 1 grain of rice, and he was so emaciated and thin that when he touched his stomach, he could feel his spine. Sometimes you can see images of the Buddha in that state, like where he's just completely emaciated, like all bones. And he was doing these intense austerities. And after a while, he realized that he wasn't attaining what he wanted by doing those practices. And so he set off, and he left the 5 other disciples behind. And of course, they rolled their eyes and thought, "Oh, good luck. You're just leaving the path. Sorry. Sorry for you. Nothing's going to happen for you." And he wandered, and at that point, he was so incredibly weak. And there's a beautiful story about like a maiden girl, and her name was Sujata, and she saw the Buddha, and she felt so much love and devotion for him, and she saw him, and she made him this beautiful, like milk, like rice milk kind of drink thing, and he had that, and it gave him the strength. And from there, he went to the Bodhi tree. He found the Bodhi tree, and as the story goes, he sat there and he decided that he's not going to move from that seat under the Bodhi tree until he discovers, you know, the nature of reality, or the true nature of existence. And he sat there and he sat there, and he was tempted by Mara. He was tempted by all of these things coming towards him that were trying to sway him for his path, but he just kept sitting there and sitting there, and then, ta-da! He got enlightened, what we call enlightened. Such a trivial way to talk about something so profound, but I want to go into the teaching, so I don't want to take too much time with that. But when the Buddha woke up, the Buddha is awakened to be awake. He needed a witness, and he touched the earth. It's just so beautiful. He touched the earth, and the earth was his witness to all of his past lives and all of the beautiful good deeds that he did, and what brought him to that point. After the Buddha awakened, he just wanted to stay in that state. I'm sure if any of us, attained that, pierced the nature of reality, we're sitting in that sort of bliss state, we would just want to just be there and not have any desire to go back out into the madness. But after a while, Brahma, it's said in one of the stories, Brahma the god came and said, please, will you please teach? We need your wisdom in this world. And he really didn't want to, but he finally agreed that he would share his teachings. And he wandered and wandered, and he went over to the deer park in Sarnath, which is where he saw and met those 5 disciples who he was practicing those austerities with. And they saw him coming, and they thought, oh, there's that loser guy who just walked off the path. But then when they got closer, they realized something is different about this guy. He's got this glow, something has changed. And these people ended up becoming his first 5 disciples. And it was there in the deer park in Sarnath that it said that he turned the wheel of Dharma. So what's interesting is that sage Asita said that he was going to be a Chakravartin, a wheel-turning king. So he was either going to be a wheel-turning king, but instead what he did is he turned the wheel of the Dharma. He turned the wheel of the Buddhist teachings, and that began right there in the deer park with the 4 Noble Truths, which I want to talk about a little. So that's just like the tiniest little nutshell story, but I personally find it so inspiring, because this is a man who had everything, and when he realized what was going on in this life, he had an existential crisis, which I think we can all relate to in different ways. We all have these different types of crises and challenges that make us question what's happening, who am I, what's life about. And that was like this impetus, this impulse for him to move away from the familiar and to go on this journey, deep into the forest, which I think is also a metaphor for going deep into his consciousness and deep into his mind. All of these things in the stories of the saints, I think, are such amazing metaphors, that it doesn't have to be an external thing. It's more teaching us something metaphorically. And so he left his comfortable world and set out into the depths of the forest, and he encountered all kinds of different things. And that's what happens to us, on our spiritual journey. We encounter all of these things that are within us, and sometimes it's such an uncomfortable process. There's a lot of romance around meditation and doing spiritual practices, and sometimes there's amazing, beautiful, blissful experiences that happen of oneness and feeling our heart overflowing, and then sometimes we meet a lot of things within ourselves that are sometimes hard to look at, or that hurt, old things that we haven't metabolized, or memories or traumas, or, these things come up as we turn within. So it's kind of like going into that wilderness within ourselves, like the Buddha did. And I think it's a beautiful story, because we all, in some ways, have our palaces that we build. We have our own kingdoms and queendoms, so to speak, where we try to buffer ourselves from things. We try to keep everything, comfortable and safe. And then at a certain point, sometimes something happens, and it shatters that, or it makes us question that, or we realize that maybe we're kind of hiding out in something that's comfortable. We want to be free, but we don't know how. And that internal battle, internal struggle, I think the Buddha is just such an amazing example of someone who went so deep into himself. When you read the life of Buddha, or you read like the Buddha Charita, for example, you hear that his struggle, how overcome he was by seeing these things, and how it made his mind just go into almost like a state of shock that he couldn't continue on in his life that way anymore. And so what a beautiful example for all of us, to trust our path, that when he was with those disciples, they kind of rolled their eyes at him when he walked away, but he trusted himself and he followed his path, and then he had his awakening. So I think that in itself is also such a beautiful teaching, to really trust ourselves on the path, to know, have we outgrown a certain palace of our own mental conditioning, of a way of perceiving reality, of a way of perceiving ourselves, to look deeply and question that. His life is such an incredible example of that. And so many saints and sages have amazing stories that are examples of that too. So I want to stop there for a moment, because I wanted to take us more into a meditative space of the heart before I go into some of what he taught in that first teaching, because I think it's so important to have that balance of head and heart. My teacher Amma, she says, the intellect cuts and divides like a pair of scissors, and the heart joins together and unites like a needle, and the tailor uses both. It's one of my favorite quotes of hers, and I think it's really true that our mind likes to eat these kind of stories and eat the wisdom and philosophy because it's just so interesting, but then to be able to feel it in our body and in our heart, I think, is equally important. So when a person, so-called steps onto the Buddhist path, often when they receive, a Dharma name or take the precepts, they also take refuge in the three jewels. And in the Buddhist tradition, this is known as the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha is, of course, His Holiness, the Buddha. But the Buddha is also not just a person at all. The Buddha is the Buddha nature that lives inside of all of us. The Buddha is ultimately not a dude who left the palace and had this experience. He is that, but he represents the essence of this essential awakened nature that lives within all of us. It's known by different names in different traditions. So we take refuge in the Buddha, in our own Buddha nature. And we take refuge in the Dharma, which is the teachings that the Buddha offered us. But the Dharma is also just that timeless wisdom that we can take refuge in, that can help us, that can support us, on our human journey. And then the Sangha, which is us, which is the community of practitioners, the community of people who are gathered together with a similar intention and longing to grow our hearts and to awaken, to meet ourselves. So we take refuge in that as well. So I think the three jewels are a foundational teaching in Buddhism as well, and something that I think is so beautiful, the idea of taking refuge. Because usually we take refuge in things that are shifty, if you know what I mean. We take refuge in things that can change. And so there's not sort of a security there. People, places, things, ideas, we take refuge in that, but really something like the Buddha, our Buddha nature, or the teachings of the Buddha, or the Sangha, these things are sustaining. Look at the Buddhist teachings and the Buddha himself, passed down 2,500 years, and we're still talking about him. So that is something that we can, when we feel suffering on our journey, we can rest our mind in that. We can go to that as a source of sustenance. We take refuge in that. Really what we're doing is we're just taking refuge in ourselves. Ajahn Chah, who was a wonderful teacher, a Thai forest monk, he was an important teacher for Jack Kornfield and others. But he said, the true refuge is the heart, nothing else, which is a quote that is just dear to me. And I think that that is the ultimate essence, that when we take refuge, ultimately we're just taking refuge in our own heart. So I wanted to sing for all of us the three jewels, the invocation. So when a person, like when I received the Buddhist precepts many years ago. It was at Plum Village with Thich Nhat Hanh. You say, Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami, Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. It means I go to the Buddha for refuge. I take Buddha in the refuge. I take Buddha in the refuge. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in my heart, in my Buddha nature. I take refuge in the Dharma, in the teachings. I take refuge in the Sangha and the community. So beautiful. And this, it can also be used as a chant. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami, Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. I love that word Sharanam. Sharanam, it means to take refuge in. If you've heard my chant Rambient, which I think some of you have, I sing Sharanam Sharanam in that chant. And it's just a beautiful invitation to take that refuge, to rest in our own being, to rest in our heart, to rest in our Buddha nature. So I'm going to just take a few minutes to just sing this, and it's really simple and really spacious, but I invite you as I sing it to just connect to what that means for you. It doesn't have to be about Buddha himself. It's not about, signing on a dotted line, so to speak. It's about contemplating and feeling how to take refuge in something that's true within yourself. Teachings, teacher, the teacher within your heart, the community, the community that holds and supports you, whether that be a community of people. For example, our circle on the app is a beautiful Sangha, whether it be the Sangha of nature, Mother Earth, the community of nature that we're all a part of, to take refuge. So see how that feels for you. And I'm going to just chant that. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami, Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. So for this time, for our session, just for this hour and a half, we can just take that refuge in our hearts and with gratitude, receive the amazing teachings that have been passed on by this incredible sage, Shakyamuni Buddha, sage of the Shakyas. Okay, so this is a good time for turning inwards and quieting, just taking a little pause to meditate before we go into some of the other stuff. So just let yourself be present here. Just letting that story of this amazing being just rest in your being. It's his story, in some ways, all of our stories. It's one story. We're all on that quest for freedom, more love. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So how can we find that refuge in ourselves? By quieting our mind and turning within, letting go of our external searching of our mind, letting our mind return to the source and take refuge in that, in our heart. Buddha Sharanam Gacchami, Dharma Sharanam Gacchami, Sangham Sharanam Gacchami, Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Sharanam gacchami. Sangam Sharanam Gacchami. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Dharma Sharanam Gacchami. Sangam Sharanam Gacchami. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami. Sangam Sharanam Gacchami. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami. Sangam Sharanam Gacchami. Go to your own heart for refuge. And take refuge in your Buddha nature, in your awakened nature. Even if it feels far away, it's just obscured by the clouds of your thoughts. Our thoughts obscure us from the clear sky, but that doesn't mean the sky isn't there. So we take refuge in that knowing of our awakened nature, in the teachings that help us to awaken that, and in the community that supports us on our journey. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami. Sangam Sharanam Gacchami. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Sangam Sharanam Gacchami. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami. Sangam Sharanam Gacchami. So have a feeling that you're taking refuge within your own heart. that the truth, that the wisdom that the Buddha shared with us, and it also lives within us. And when we study and listen to these teachings, it's simply a remembrance of something that we know already and just forgot. And as you breathe, just create space between your thoughts. Breathe into the space. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami. Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. I take refuge in my own Buddha nature, and I take refuge in the teachings and in the community. Thank you. So when the Buddha, thank you, Stephen, for your donation. When the Buddha was in the deer park, and his first 5 disciples came, he, as I said, turned the wheel of Dharma for the first time. And he set these Buddhist teachings into motion. And the first thing he said was what many of us have heard as the foundation of the Four Noble Truths, which is that suffering exists. Sometimes it's translated as life is suffering, or there is suffering, or suffering is a part of life, or whatever it may be. But he's basically saying there is suffering. Suffering exists, and everything is suffering on some level. So when I first heard that, I really thought it was so negative and pessimistic, and I thought, man, this Buddha guy, he must have been really depressed or something, because that's so I don't want to live my life thinking that everything is suffering. And I remember when I was like in high school thinking like, this is just, I don't know how to relate to this. And then I realized, oh wait a minute, I think I do, because I am suffering. I am suffering. So why am I so resistant to the Buddha saying that there is suffering when I myself am suffering? Maybe it's because I don't want to admit it to myself. Maybe it's because I would like that not to be the case. But in again, not to be the case, that doesn't have anything, because it actually is the case. So the Buddha was so genius because he named the reality. He named the elephant in the room. He said, suffering is happening. And until you realize you're suffering, you're not going to do anything about it. You know, until we realize something's wrong, I don't feel right, you know, I'm very unsatisfied. Until we realize that, we're not going to do anything to change it, whatever it may be. You know, whatever, even tiny awakening, even if it's not even that tiny, but if you're in a job, for example, you really don't like it, the only way to make a change is to first admit to yourself that something's not right, whatever it may be. So the Buddha understood that, which I think is so genius and seemingly simple, but not really, because a lot of us prefer not to look at the reality. In so many ways, our society is built around these illusions that there is no suffering, or that you can just find a little magic potion and it's going to take all your suffering away. Whereas the Buddha just said, let's just look at it. Let's just look at it directly. Let's be honest. We're all suffering here. And that is the beginning of liberation, to actually acknowledge and admit that something's not right. The word that the Buddha used when he thank you, Richard. Oh, thank you. The word that the Buddha used that often gets translated as suffering is dukkha. Well, it's spelled differently in Pali or in Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, it's D-U-K-K-H-A, dukkha. Dukkha doesn't exactly mean suffering the way that we tend to think that it does. It's difficult because sometimes these words in Sanskrit, they're very, and even in other languages too, when you try to translate them into English, something gets a little bit lost. They're very deep and nuanced, so it's not like a perfect equation. The word dukkha, as he explained it, it means almost more like unsatisfactoriness, or like discontent, like something's off. It's not necessarily that like life is suffering and I always feel like I'm just miserable and I'm suffering and it's horrible, because a lot of sometimes we have happy moments and joyful moments and we think, well, I'm not suffering then. But when we go deeper into the teaching, we can understand what he meant by that. So he didn't really mean suffering as we think about it, but he meant more like that something is off. And what's interesting is that the literal translation of the word dukkha means bad axle hole. I think he must have had a sense of humor. I think most saints have a sense of humor, thank goodness. But bad axle hole. An axle, it goes in the middle of a wheel. And back in the day, I think the axles were made out of like big stones. And so in the middle of a wheel, like on a chariot or something like that, if you have an axle that doesn't fit right in the wheel, it really makes for a bumpy ride. If you have like a square axle and a circular wheel, you're just like bouncing up and down all over the place. It's just, you don't have a smooth ride at all. So that's kind of what it means. Dukkha, a bad axle hole. Something's off and the ride is really bumpy. And I think we can all relate to that. So he said there are different kinds of dukkha. Usually when we hear the teaching like life is suffering, often it just kind of ends there. But he went so deep into it and he explained it in so many different ways that I think is really valuable to just look at a little bit and contemplate for our own life to try to understand what it meant, or what he meant by that. I can't say that I could ever understand what he meant because I don't have the consciousness that he did. So I'm talking to you from my limitations here, but my interpretation and my limited knowledge. So there are 3 types of suffering that he talked about. The first one is just called dukkha dukkha, the suffering of suffering. Suffering of suffering is what we tend to think of as suffering. Well, my spiritual teacher, Amma, she makes a joke sometimes that you have engagement ring, wedding ring, and suffering, which I think is hilarious and great. So I think we all know suffering, different kinds of suffering. You have mosquitoes, it's too hot, it's raining, you're uncomfortable, or we have real suffering of, suffering of difficult things that are happening that are causing us discomfort in our body or in life in general. This is the most identifiable kind of form of suffering. The suffering of suffering, dukkha dukkha. Then he talked about something called viparinama dukkha. Viparinama dukkha is the suffering of change. This is really interesting. So we live in a world that is always shape-shifting, right? It's constantly moving and shaking and changing, and because there's so much change, we have suffering because a lot of times we don't want things to change. Interestingly, we experience suffering, or maybe you can contemplate this for yourself. I experience suffering. We experience suffering when we don't get what we want. I want this person, I want this thing, I can't have it, I'm suffering, I'm burning up inside because of it. We suffer when we get what we don't want. Something happens in life, something happens that we don't want. We all have the experiences of something happening that we don't want. That also causes us suffering. If we look deeper, we can see that oftentimes we also suffer when we do get what we want. This is very subtle. But imagine I have a friend who recently got into a new relationship and she's very happy. She's in the honeymoon phase and she's just really, really so happy to be with this person. But yet she can't fully relax into it because she feels like, what if something happens? What if something goes wrong? What if I sabotage it? What if he sabotages it? What if it doesn't work out? What if, the what if train? That's not a very pleasant train, but I know well. So she got what she wanted, but she can't fully relax into it because she fears, what if she loses this thing? Or what if something goes wrong? So that's really interesting. Amma sometimes describes it, I've heard her say, it's like honey on the tip of a needle. We get that honey and then, get a little prick. And it's not that it's meant to, doesn't mean that we don't have happiness and joy in our life, but just that when we take refuge in those things, or we expect that things are always going to remain the same, our mind gets anxiety and we start to suffer. We start to cling on to them. We want them to stay the way that we want them to be. This is the suffering of change. We get what we want, we don't get what we want, or we get what we don't want. It's a little tongue twister, but it's interesting to just sit and think about those things. A lot of the time our suffering comes from that, and oftentimes it's really just within our own mind. The fictions and the stories that we're creating about the world, about ourselves, how we are shaping this world into a reality that isn't really reality, whatever that means, but more the filters that we're looking through our misunderstanding about the nature of things. So the suffering of change. I once heard a quote that I loved, and I don't know who said it, so I can't attribute it properly, but I think it just explains it so great. It says, everything is made of ice cream and the sun is shining. I just love that. Everything is made of ice cream and the sun is shining. It's true. Everything changes. Our body, this body is different from what this body was a year ago, and certainly 20 or 30 years ago, 40 years ago. This is a completely different body, and it will be a different body. It's many different things. You can buy a beautiful brand new car that's so perfect, but there's no guarantee that it's not going to get nicked, or that something's not going to happen to it. Someone could open the door and make a big, bash in it. So we live in this world where a lot of things are often changing and unreliable. But the problem is we want them to stay a certain way, and that often causes us suffering. So that's viparinama dukkha, the suffering of change. And these are, it's much more nuanced than this, but I'm just kind of giving you like the general overview. Then the third type of suffering that he mentioned is called sankhara dukkha, which is difficult to really fully grasp with the mind, I think, or my mind, but I can intuit it and understand it. And that's considered to be what's known as all-pervasive suffering, meaning that just the sense that like something's a little off, like I can't quite fully get comfortable because like it always feels like a shoe's gonna drop or something, like something is just not quite right. I don't know, can you relate to that? Just that feeling like everything's good, I think it's all good, I'm fine, but there's always that but, but what if, or oh no, or my mind is spinning out, or this could happen, or so that sort of sense of uncertainty. The reason that, according to the Buddha, one of the reasons that we have this sense of all-pervasive suffering is that we really have a very strong misunderstanding about who we are. And this is avidya, this is ignorance. We think that I am a solid person. I am this, I am unchanging, I'm like a golf ball, I'm just like an unchanging thing. But in truth, according to the Buddhist teachings anyway, there really is no such thing as like a solid entity of anything, really. Everything in existence is different causes and conditions that are coming together to create that thing. Could I say like, this is me, or this is me, or I don't know, is a thought me, or an emotion me, or what is me? What is me? What I take to be me, that I try to solidify, if you really start to look more deeply into it, it kind of becomes clear that it's not what you think it is. It's almost like an orange. When you eat an orange, in the middle, there's not anything there. So because we have that misperception, we think I'm the solid person, I am me, and I'm separate from you, we build these palaces, so to speak, like the Buddha, to try to keep us, within that sense of reality. And that causes us a sense of suffering. So, doing practices like meditation, they help to let go and create more space around that solidity. When there's more space, we can breathe more deeply, we can feel there's more of a sense of restfulness, but when everything is crowded, there's like an agitation when there's that solidity that happens. At least for me, anyway, I could very much relate to that and experience that. And I think ultimately, what one of the most important teachings to come out of these teachings on suffering is really just that because we don't fully understand who we are, we're seeking our happiness in the wrong place. We think that our happiness is out there somewhere. We think that it has to be in this object, that if I just got this object and grabbed onto it and held it forever, that I would be okay. Or in this thought or belief, or in this place, or in this thing, or whatever it may be, that we attribute happiness to objects, when really the happiness is actually in the mind of the one enjoying it. For example, cake. I really would love happiness to exist in cake, and I'll just keep eating it until I get happy. But it never makes me happy if I just kept eating cake over and over again. I'd get sick. As much as I might think the happiness is in the cake, if I keep eating it, I'll realize that the happiness isn't really in the cake. It's actually in my mind, thinking that the cake will make me happy. Or think about smoking. Some people love smoking, and other people abhor it. They don't even like the smell of smoke. If happiness was contained in the cigarette, then everybody should be able to smoke it and feel happy, but that's not the case. It's what we bring to it with our mind. It's the mind of the enjoyer. We attribute and project our happiness onto something, and we think that that's the source of our happiness, but really the source is coming from within us. A metaphor, I always, quote Amma because she's my teacher, and I just love the way she explains things. And she gave a metaphor once of a dog. When a dog eats a bone, it eats the bone and eats the bone, and then its gums bleed when it eats the bone. So, but it thinks the blood is coming from the bone, but it's not. The blood is coming from its own gums. It's so interesting. It's like that's what we do. We're like, oh, my happiness or my this is coming from this thing, but actually it's coming from inside of us, but we think it's coming from outside. And that goes, deeper into those teachings of the Buddha around no self, and recognizing that who we think our self is not what it is. And different spiritual traditions talk about it differently. So I'm just sharing one tiny sliver of some of the Buddhist teachings. There's other ones that are different, but the foundational teaching of the idea of no self, or that I think I'm this person, I'm this solid person, and therefore I need to do everything to preserve that. And so change makes me suffer. Thinking of losing, what I identify with makes me suffer, and so on and on. And it's really, we grasp. He explains later in the Four Noble Truths that there is a cause for our suffering. The cause is clinging, desire, attachment. We're grasping onto things because we want to solidify this person. So what do we do with all of that? I don't think ultimately it's like if we just eat the philosophical pretzels, so to speak. It doesn't get us very far, but it helps us to have an intellectual understanding of okay, I get it. I'm disappointed, or I'm frustrated, and I don't want these things to happen, but in some sense this is the nature of life. Like the Buddha said, suffering exists. There is suffering. And instead of chastising ourselves for feeling suffering, instead of making ourselves wrong or blaming ourselves, I think it's really helpful and important to recognize that it's not our fault that we're suffering. We're not wrong or bad because we suffer. This is the nature of human life, that suffering is in it because we fundamentally don't really understand who we are. And all the different spiritual paths, through different forms and different names, are here to help us wake up, to remember really what we are. Not this fiction of ego or fiction of self that we take ourselves to be. And it always gets, there's so many layers. It's like sometimes I just hesitate to talk about anything because, there's always a million angles to look at anything from. When I'm doing a session like this, we only have such a little bit of time, so it's just one tiny sliver of a prism, and it's oh, but what about all this? What about all that? Just pointing, planting a tiny seed to just contemplate and just to sit with and think about. For me, the ultimate teaching of these teachings on suffering, of the First Noble Truth about dukkha, is that life is bumpy and there is this uncertainty, but that suffering is universal because we don't fully understand really at all who we are and what the nature of this world is. But that is something that can open our heart and connect us to one another. That we all suffer. We can all relate to one another's suffering. We can feel empathy. We can awaken our heart through feeling into that. It's like a tenderness. When we feel that suffering, even just on my circle yesterday and today, and all the time, but just so many beautiful and painful stories being shared of different types of suffering that people are experiencing. It just, if I really start to think about it, then it will make me feel like emotional, because it's difficult, this human life. There's loss, and like, just like the Buddha said, there's old age, sickness, death, loss. We suffer, because of this, because we love. We love, and we want to grab and hold, and the nature of things is that we can't always do that. So we suffer from that. But I don't think that it's not intended to make us depressed. It's not intended to make us feel negative and down about life, that it's all this horrible thing. To me, it's inspiring, because it says, I want to feel connected to other people. I want to open my heart. I want to feel like compassion. I want to connect with humanity. What is the purpose of anything, other than to love, to awaken, to feel close to others, to have that intimacy, which we can't have intimacy of any kind if we're really withholding truth. And that's why I think as soon as the Buddha said suffering exists, he named the truth, and he immediately created an intimacy with everybody, because he spoke the truth that everybody knows but nobody wants to admit. So how could we not feel that sense of intimacy with him, that sense of closeness, that he's acknowledging, my pain, your pain. There's a unity in that. We can connect, and we can support one another and help to hold up, a light for one another as we go through these things. And then learn little by little, that not only does the suffering connect us in our humanity, but there's something greater than that too. Compassion and that awakened Buddha nature that lives within us. That is ultimately what all points towards, is that when we clear away the dust from our eyes and, stop always trying to seek that happiness or that satisfaction in the things that we can't always, find it in, then we turn back to take refuge in our own heart, where we really can find that genuine, like, fulfillment or genuine understanding, that what we're projecting outwardly is actually coming from the projector. As soon as you turn off the projector, all the images just get sucked right back into it. So it's within. And of course the Buddha, he didn't just stop with the first noble truth, because then that would be kind of like, oh, okay, like what I just shared with you, well, now what? But he went deeper, and he said, like, there's a cause for it, and he talked about the cause, and then he gave a path to freedom, which is the Eightfold Path in the Buddhist tradition. But if we were going to say that this is kind of a blueprint for humanity, or a blueprint for the spiritual journey, you could say that there's infinite paths to freedom. There's infinite paths to help us wake up, from the illusion of being a separate self. Because that's what hurts us so much, is that sense I'm separate from everything, I'm separate from everyone, I'm all alone in my suffering and nobody understands it. I know for myself, like, when I don't feel like anyone understands me, it hurts. I want to feel understood. We all want to feel understood. And that longing and that desire is kind of, in some ways it's embedded in us. And we can learn to be present for our humanity. We don't have to bypass that humanity. We can actually embrace it and let it help us awaken, to open our heart, so that we can ultimately, go beyond our ideas of what we think we are, or what reality is, to something so much vaster and more beautiful than probably most of us could ever imagine. And that's what the example of his life. When we see these sights, or we experience these difficult things, they're an invitation to wake up. They're an invitation to return, to remember what we've forgotten. So I could just keep going on and on about it, but I don't want to, bore you, and I also don't want to just like talk it into the ground. But the basic idea is dukkha, that something is unsatisfied within us, but that there's an inherent wisdom in that. Because if there wasn't, chances are we probably wouldn't all be here together, if there wasn't something that was like not quite satisfied. But we know, we can intuit, like, there's got to be more than just, there has to be more than just the cake that I'm hoping is going to make me feel happy forever. It hasn't worked, so I'm hoping that there's something else. And for me personally, that longing is just so strong, which is why I've just, wanted to just voraciously eat all of these different types of teachings throughout my life, because that there's a knowing, like, I know there's more. I know that I could see things differently. I know that my consciousness could change, and I'm not quite sure how, but I want to learn from those who have done that, who've mastered that. And I want to connect with people who share that desire. I want to open my heart to feel compassion, to grow from that. Because when we feel compassion, it means to suffer with. And it breaks us out of our cage of isolation. And it really does expand our heart. It helps us go beyond that safe little palace where we want to kind of lock ourselves up, to go into the world, into the beauty of life and of nature, where there's so many possibilities. So I wanted to sing a mantra for you that maybe some of you are familiar with. I would imagine so. Gate gate parasam gate bodhi swaha, or in Tibetan Soha. This is a mantra that comes from the Heart Sutra, Prajnaparamita Sutra. And the Prajnaparamita is sort of considered almost like a goddess herself, the text. And the Heart Sutra is sort of like a commentary on the nature of emptiness, in a way. The idea that, like I was saying before, that maybe I'm not as solid as I think I am. Maybe there's more space and fluidity in my being than I imagine. Maybe I don't have to make myself into a block of cement, but I can be more fluid. Like I said before when we were doing the meditation, just like breathe into the spaces between your thoughts. That when we can, when you're relaxed, you can notice that, like, there's more space even in your whole body. Like even your muscles feel more spacious. Like when your mind feels more spacious, that's a pleasant place to be. And so maybe we can be in that space more and not have to make ourselves like a clenched fist, So the Heart Sutra talks about that, about recognizing that everything is sort of compounded. All things in life have a compounded nature, meaning they have different components that make them up, and that we can see deeply into that, to the space inside, essentially. But this mantra, gate gate parasam gate bodhi swaha, is beautiful, and again, there's no way that I, with my limited consciousness, can possibly interpret any of these things, but just for something for our mind, it basically means gone, gone, gone beyond all of it. Hail enlightenment, yay enlightenment, swaha. It's like an exclamation. And I love that, because to me, gate gate, gone, gone. I'm going far beyond. I'm going beyond my ideas about who I am. I'm going beyond my ideas about how my life should be. I'm going beyond my concepts of other people. Just think about how much we solidify not only our own selves, but other people. The way I've talked about it before and think about it sometimes is the metaphor of the White Witch in the Chronicles of Narnia. In the C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's a white witch, and if she has this wand or something, if she wants, she can just put it on someone and turn them to stone. So whatever position they're in, when she does it, they just become stone. And I think that's such a great metaphor for what we do to one another. It's like, instead of having a mind that's like a mirror where we see things and let it go, usually our mind is like a camera. We take a snapshot of a person and we freeze them in that position. We freeze them in that role. We turn other people to stone. We turn ourselves to stone too. But as we create these solidifying things, we think we know. I think I know who you are. You think you know who I am. I think I know how the world works. We create very little space for ourselves. We create very little possibility, because we're just constantly solidifying and turning everything into stone. So it's interesting to just become aware of that. How are my judgments or my thoughts that I'm projecting onto the world? How are they freezing it in a certain way and stopping, my perceptions from transforming into something that might be more beneficial and even more true? So gone, gone, gone beyond. I'm gone beyond all of these things, all of these ideas about myself, all of this attachments to my ego and this desire to find my happiness always on the outside. And even I can let go and go beyond the things that feel like they're holding me back. Sometimes, like, I love the image of like someone pulling our shirt back. Like, so often we can just feel like something is like pulling me back from moving forward, but often it's just our own perceptions about things. It's my own beliefs about reality or about myself that I'm like pulling myself back in that way. So how do we go beyond that? So gate gate para samgate bodhi swaha. It's a praising the awakened mind, praising the awakened heart. We go beyond everything that's in the way of us connecting to that. And this is a song that I adapted from a friend of mine named Franny Faith, who's a singer-songwriter, and she gave me permission, and I added some different parts to it, and I added some English words at one point that spoke to me. I was singing to Prajnaparamita, who is like the goddess of the sutra, and I said, "Take me in your embrace, show me my original face, carry me to the other shore, Mother Divine, I'm yours." And really, for me, what that meant was like, it's just another way of saying I'm taking refuge in the teachings, or I'm taking refuge in my heart. Let me see my original face, the face that I had before I was born, the face that I had before I slapped all kinds of conditions and labels on myself, or before I let the world do that to me. What is that face? So that's what this mantra is. So I'm going to sing this, and if you want to sing along, you can, or you can just let yourself be with it and let everything that I just shared, just let it go. You know, if there's anything that's valuable for you, you can be sure that it will be there after, but maybe just let your mind rest in the space of it all, and we can just sit together in this energy of gratitude for the Buddha and what he's shared with us that is still so alive all these years later. So gate gate padagate, padasamgate bodhi swaha. If there's anything that you feel in your life or in yourself that you're wanting to go beyond, whatever that means to you, you can bring that in. You know, we can focus on that. May I go to the other shore. May I go beyond what I think is possible in my mind. It's a beautiful thing to contemplate, even if sometimes we don't know how to bridge the gap, even if we don't know how to get from point A to point B. Just that aspiration and the awareness, the paying attention, is often the beginning of that process happening. So that's all we need, to pay attention. There's a lama, Lama Lobsang Palden, who is a healing lama I used to study with for many years, and he would always say to me, "Pay attention," and I would say, "No, I don't want to pay attention." Paying attention is just highly unpleasant sometimes, but so important, you know. And so he would always just say, "Pay attention, pay attention, pay attention." I could just feel the resistance, like, "No, I don't want to pay attention. I want to go into the future. I want to go into the past." Okay, no, I'm going to just pay attention. Just be here. Just be here. Okay. It's all okay right here. Just pay attention. Gate, gate, parangate, parasangate bodhi swaha. Gate, gate, parangate, parasangate bodhi swaha. Gate, gate, parangate, parasangate bodhi swaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate bodhi swaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate Bodhi Swaha Gate Para Gate Para Sangate Bodhi Swaha. Take me in your embrace, show me my radiant face, carry me to the other shore, Mother Divine, I'm yours. Take me in your embrace, help me see my radiant face, carry me to the other shore, Mother Divine, I'm yours. Gate, gate, Paragate, Parasangate, Bodhi Swaha. Gate, gate, Paragate, Parasangate, Bodhi Swaha. Gan, gan, gan beyond, gan, gan, gan beyond, gan, gan, gan beyond, letting go, moving on, gan, gan, gan beyond, gan, gan, gan beyond, gan, gan, gan beyond. Letting go, moving on. Gate, gate, parangate, parasangate, Bodhi Swaha. Gate, gate, paragate, Parasangate Bodhi Swaha. Gan, gan, gan beyond, gan, gan, gan beyond, gan, gan, gan beyond, letting go, moving on, gan, gan, gan beyond, gan, gan, beyond, gone, gone beyond, letting go, moving on. Anything in your life that you feel you want to go beyond? Some ideas about yourself or the nature of the way things are? You can just feel in this mantra that wisdom to go beyond. Let go of our false ideas of ourselves. Let go of our false ideas of one another and open our hearts to seeing things as they are, to feeling compassion, which is really what unites us. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, Bodhi Swaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, Bodhi Swaha. Gate, gate, parangate, parasangate, Bodhi Swaha. Gate, gate, parangate, parasangate, Bodhi Swaha. Let's just take a few minutes to sit and do a brief meditation. and pay attention. That's all we need to do. Just be here together in the Sangha. Sangam Sharanam Gacchami. Take refuge in the Sangha. Letting your mind just settle down. And let's connect just with the quality of our heart. To tune into the reality of our suffering, the ways that we suffer in all different ways. And let's extend our own heart towards ourselves in this freeing, knowing that the suffering that we experience in this life, it doesn't mean we're wrong. This is life. We have to open our own heart towards ourselves and then towards one another. Thich Nhat Hanh says that when we have a love or a partner, then we can say to that person, darling, I know you're suffering. I know you're hurting, and I'm sorry. And we can say those same things to ourselves. Say to our own heart, our own mind, darling, I know you're suffering. I'm sorry. I see you. I acknowledge what's happening for you, and I won't turn away anymore. I won't pretend that you're fine when you're not. When we acknowledge our own suffering, it's the beginning of awakening, as the Buddha taught. So just feel that in your heart. Darling, I'm sorry. You know you're suffering. And I bring to that suffering my full presence and my full love and attention. That's the healing. And that paying attention. Bringing our love and our awareness to the places that hurt. And I'm going to read you this beautiful passage from Pema Chodron. Sometimes the completely open heart and mind of bodhicitta is called the soft spot, a place as vulnerable and tender as an open wound. It is equated in part with our ability to love. Sometimes this broken heart gives birth to anxiety and panic, sometimes to anger, resentment, and blame. But under the hardness of that armor, there is the tenderness of genuine sadness. This is our link with all those who have ever loved. This genuine heart of sadness can teach us great compassion. It can humble us when we're arrogant and soften us when we are unkind. It awakens us when we prefer to sleep and pierces through our indifference. This continual ache of the heart is a blessing that, when accepted fully, can be shared with all. This continual ache of the heart is a blessing that, when accepted fully, can be shared with all. So giving our gratitude to His Holiness the Buddha for his amazing wisdom and teachings to help us understand more of why we suffer and to help us to bring compassion and awareness to those places without pushing them away, but looking at them honestly, looking at them truly through our heart, and letting the compassion for ourselves expand until it touches the whole universe. May we always come back and take refuge in the Buddha nature within us, in the teachings and in the community. May we always show up and be present for the places within ourselves that suffer and that hurt. And then do that for each other. So I'm just going to end by chanting Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu 9 times. May all beings everywhere be peaceful and happy. We dedicate the merit, as it's called in the Buddhist tradition, we dedicate the merit of our time together, the goodness, to all beings, to all of creation, that everyone may experience the gifts of insight, compassion, and love, that hopefully we're watering those seeds in our times together here. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. 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 Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Thank you so much. Shanti is peace. Shanti, Shanti to all of us, to our hurting places, and to the world with all of its hurts. We send our love. We try to learn, try our best to be good people, try to be kind, and forgive ourselves for our mistakes along the way. There's no success without failure, you know, so it's good to embrace and love that. So I hope that you received something from this. I know it was a little heady and a little philosophical, but a number of people in my circle had expressed an interest in doing a little more with the Buddhist stuff, so I wanted to offer that. I know it's a little different from what I usually do, so hopefully there was a little something in there for you. I just added a few new sessions. I decided to do one next Sunday on Rest and Receive. That will be very different from today. It will be more of a guided journey experience, just a little bit of sharing at the beginning, but it'll be more of a experience. Rest and Receive. Who doesn't need that, especially right now in these times in the world? And then I'm going to do a session on August 1st on self-forgiveness, which is a really important practice for me, to practice that I like to do and that I like to share with people, unburdening the heart, how we can learn to really love ourselves, forgive ourselves. And, I think that's one of the most important things that we can do. And my new course that is coming along, famous last words that I keep saying over and over, but that's an important component of it too. And then I'll be doing another session later in August on longing, on the longing heart. So anyway, so grateful to all of you so much for being here and staying 90 minutes. I always for my sessions about 90 minutes. I know that's a bit long, but I feel like I want to offer you as much as I can, and of course you're always welcome to leave at any time, but I feel like I'm able to go a bit deeper with that time. And if you like, you're more than welcome to join my circle on the app. It's called Friends of Carrie Grossman. And it's just, I don't know what to say except that I'm completely humbled and moved by the people in the circle, the wisdom that's shared, the way that it's a mirror that teaches me so much about myself all the time. And I can't communicate how thankful I am that it's a river that flows, that is co-created by everyone, all equal, no hierarchies, just a circle of humans sharing our hearts. So you're more than welcome to that. And anyway, so grateful to you, and I wish you a beautiful, peaceful evening and day wherever you are. Thank you to those of you who made donations. It means so much to me, and it really helps me as I'm recording my course. Every drop helps, and I'm so grateful to you. So I will see you next week if you want to come and rest and receive. And that's it. No highfalutin dukkha stories or anything. But if you're interested in learning more about the Buddha's life, you can listen to my story on the app. It's not my story. You can listen to the story on the app, The Life of Buddha. It has a beautiful soundtrack that goes with it that my friend Pierre-Andre Rigaud created. We did it together, and it kind of brings the story alive. And you can also read The Life of Buddha by Andre Ferdinand Harold. It's available free online, and there are many beautiful texts as well that you can learn about. And you can certainly learn more about the Four Noble Truths, and there are so many incredible Buddhist teachers in this world, and I feel grateful for everything I've learned from the Buddha. And even though my path is very deeply in the bhakti tradition, singing and chanting, and that path is very important to me, the Buddhist tradition and the teachings have equally been a really important part of my life. So it means so much to be able to share that with you. So thank you. Lots of love, and thank you, Heather. I'm sorry I didn't catch really any of your comments because I was trying to stay focused, because I could easily go off course. All right. Hope you have a great night, and I'll see you next week if you like, or whenever you feel like coming back.